Ryan Carter had always believed the worst of humanity's battles were behind him, a former military engineer. He had seen enough conflict to last a lifetime. Now, as he sat in a dimly lit bar in downtown Manhattan, nursing a glass of whiskey, what felt like a distant memory. Across the table, Ethan Wells tapped away on a tablet, muttering about firewalls and encryption codes, while Damian Rook and Jack Jacks Thompson argued over whether muscle memory or raw instinct made a better marksman. It was the kind of meaningless debate old friends had when they'd seen too much and lived to talk about it. Outside, the streets were alive with the usual hum of city life. Neon billboards flickered against the night sky. Taxis honked impatiently, and people moved in hurried streams, oblivious to the universe beyond their own small worlds. Ryan sighed, half listening to his friends, when the overhead lights flickered. Then, just as quickly, they cut out completely. For a moment, there was silence. The usual city noise dulled, replaced by something else, a low, pulsing hum that pressed against Ryan's skull like pressure from deep underwater. The bar's emergency lights kicked on, casting eerie red glows over confused patrons. Ethan frowned, tapping at his screen. This isn't just a blackout. Cellular signals are dead. No Wi-Fi. Nothing. Then came the screaming. It started outside, a collective, terrified wail that surged through the streets. Ryan was already moving before he fully processed the sound. Years of military training had conditioned him to react first, analyze later. He shoved through the doors, his friends close behind. What he saw sent ice through his veins. The sky had turned. What had once been a blanket of familiar stars was now a swirling void, an unnatural distortion of space. Enormous vessels, sleek, black, and unervingly organic in design, hovered above the skyline. They didn't descend like traditional aircraft. They phased into place, slipping through reality like ink bleeding through paper. Smaller crafts broke away from the motherships, darting through the air with inhuman precision. And then the attack began. Beams of violet energy lanced from the smaller ships, striking buildings with pinpoint accuracy. Where the beams landed, matter disintegrated instantly. Steel, concrete, glass, and, horrifically, people. Cars were flung like toys, their metal frames twisting midair before crashing down and burning wreckage. A deafening pulse rippled through the city, sending people to their knees, clutching their heads. Ryan staggered, his vision swimming. Around him, pedestrians collapsed, their expressions slackening as if something had taken hold of them. Then, without resistance, they stood again, their movements eerily synchronized. Their eyes, once filled with panic, now glowed with a cold, vacant light. Mind control. Ryan gritted his teeth, shaking off the effects. He turned to his friends. Ethan had pressed himself against the wall, panting as though he'd just run a marathon. Damian was on his feet, teeth bared, while Jax looked 1 second away from bolting. They were all still themselves, for now. "We need to move," Ryan ordered, scanning for an escape route. The streets were already swarming with the controlled. They moved with eerie precision, their bodies shifting unnaturally, as if their limbs weren't entirely their own anymore. From above, the alien ships deployed something new. Spheres smooth and reflective like liquid mercury, dropped from the crafts and cracked open upon impact. From within emerged figures, 7 feet tall, clad in chitinous armor that pulsed like it was alive. Their faces were concealed behind seamless masks, their bodies fluid yet impossibly strong. Each step they took sent tremors through the ground. One of the creatures lifted a hand, and with a single, deliberate gesture, the controlled humans turned toward the survivors who had resisted the pulse. A silent command had been given. "They're rounding up stragglers," Ethan murmured, voice barely audible. Ryan didn't wait to see what happened to those who were captured. Subway tunnels. Now! They ran, weaving through abandoned vehicles and piles of debris. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone. A father clutched his young daughter, shielding her as a group of the controlled approached. Ryan forced himself to look away. There was nothing he could do for them now. The entrance to the subway was miraculously untouched. They descended into the darkness, the sounds of the chaos above muffling as they moved deeper. The tunnels were empty, save for the occasional flickering light, casting long, uneasy shadows. Only when they reached the maintenance room did they allow themselves to breathe. Ethan collapsed onto a crate, hands shaking as he wiped sweat from his forehead. What the hell was that? Jax paced, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Aliens. Actual aliens. And they just took out the entire city like it was nothing. Damien checked his weapons. A combat knife strapped to his thigh, and a sidearm he'd likely smuggled into the bar. They didn't just take it out. They took control. We're looking at full-scale occupation. Ryan exhaled, leaning against the wall. His mind was racing, assessing the situation like he would a battlefield. Communications were down. The military hadn't even had a chance to respond. Most of the population had been compromised. We're immune to whatever that pulse was, he said finally. We need to find out why. Ethan looked up, brow furrowed. And then what? The entire planet just got enslaved in under 10 minutes. What do 4 guys in a sewer do against that? Ryan met his gaze, unshaken. We fight. Silence settled over the group. Outside, the echoes of a conquered city whispered to the tunnels, a grim reminder what they had just escaped. But beneath it, beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else stirred. A plan, a resistance, and a war just beginning. The silence that followed the explosion was more deafening than the blast itself. A dull ringing filled Ryan Carter's ears as he stumbled forward, smoke and fire consuming the alien mothership behind him. The heat clawed at his back, but he ignored it. He had to find Damien. Flashes of memory blurred together, running to the corridors of the Kryzari command ship, planning charges at the main control hub, the desperate gunfight that had cost him precious seconds. And then Damien Rook, bleeding, half-conscious, shoving Ryan to the last exit before sealing himself inside. Ryan braced himself against the crumbling remains of an overpass, coughing up smoke as his vision cleared. The world around him was chaos. The destruction of the mothership had sent shockwaves through the alien forces, their precision crumbling, their command links severed. Across the skyline, human resistance forces emerged from the wreckage, striking back at their oppressors. The war wasn't over, but it had turned. Jax Thompson was the first to appear, covered in soot and blood, eyes scanning the destruction. When he saw Ryan, his face hardened. Where's Damien? Ryan didn't answer. The unspoken truth was already written in his expression. He saw the tension in Jax's jaw, the flicker of denial before it turned to rage. He's not dead, Jax muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He survived worse. Ethan Wells staggered toward them, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. His tablet was gone, his equipment shattered, but his mind was still racing. Tell me someone has eyes on him. Ryan shook his head, glancing back at the ruined command ship. The debris was still burning, wreckage twisting and collapsing under its own weight. No one had come out after them. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Damien Rook wasn't just a soldier. He was their anchor, the one who held them together when everything else fell apart. The idea of moving forward without him was inconceivable. A voice crackled through their remaining comms. Resistance fighters reporting enemy retreats, requesting orders. Ryan swallowed his grief, forcing himself to stand straighter. We keep moving, he said. Jax let out a harsh breath, running a hand over his face before nodding. Fine, but if there's a chance he made it, we'll find him, Ryan promised. It was a lie, but one he needed to believe. The battle had shifted. With the mothership down, the alien forces had lost cohesion. Kryzari foot soldiers moved erratically, some retreating into shadows, others fighting blindly without direction. The humans, battered and broken, still had fight left in them. As they pushed forward to the ruins of the city, Ryan felt the weight of every life lost pressing down on him. The streets were lined with the remnants of those who hadn't made it. Bodies left where they'd fallen, faces frozen in expressions of fear and pain. He had seen war before, but this was something else. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Ethan moved beside him, quiet for once. How many do you think we lost? Ryan exhaled, scanning the broken streets. Too many. They reached what had once been a resistance stronghold, a repurposed underground bunker beneath the skeletal remains of a government building. Survivors gathered inside, tending to the wounded, reloading weapons, bracing for whatever came next. Jax moved through them, searching every face, looking for someone who wasn't there. When he didn't find him, he slammed a fist against the nearest wall, breathing hard. Ryan let him have his moment. They all needed one. The bunker was eerily quiet. No victory cheers, no relief. Just exhaustion. The weight of survival pressed down on them harder than the battle itself. Ethan sat heavily on a crate, rubbing at his temples. Even with their command gone, they're not just going to roll over. They'll regroup, send reinforcements. Ryan nodded, and we'll be ready. Jax let out a bitter laugh. Ready? Damien was our best fighter. Half our people are dead, and we don't even know if the rest of the world is still standing. Ryan didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, they had won a battle, but not the war. The Kryzari had come to enslave, and they wouldn't stop until humanity was either under their control or wiped out completely. But Damien had believed they could win, and that was enough. He turned to the others, pushing past his own grief. We'll regroup, gather intel, hit them harder than they expect. We're not done. Ethan looked up, something unreadable in his gaze. Jax clenched his fists, but nodded. Ryan let his own exhaustion settle, and only for a second before forcing himself back into motion. They couldn't stop. Not now. The war wasn't over, and they still had something left to fight for. The air inside the stolen Kryzari transport was thick with tension. The hum of alien technology vibrated through the hull, a constant reminder that they were flying straight into the heart of enemy territory. Ryan Carter gripped the side of his seat, scanning the team. Ethan Wells hunched over a stolen terminal, fingers gliding across the unfamiliar interface, his expression tight with concentration. Jax Thompson checked his weapons for the third time, his jaw locked, eyes dark with unresolved anger. He still hadn't forgiven Ryan for leaving Damien behind. Neither had Ryan. Through the narrow viewport, the alien mothership loomed, a colossal behemoth of shifting metal and pulsing energy. Unlike the previous command ship they had destroyed, this one was reinforced, a planetary stronghold floating above Earth's ruined skyline. This was the heart of the Kryzari occupation. If they could bring it down, they wouldn't just cripple the invaders. They'd end the war. Ethan exhaled sharply. I've cracked their docking protocols. They think we're one of theirs. We got a small window before someone realizes we're not transmitting life signs. Ryan nodded. Then we move fast. The transport jolted as it docked. A hollow clang echoed through the ship, and the ramp hissed open. They stepped into the cold, sterile corridors of the mothership, alien symbols glowing faintly along the walls. The structure pulsed as if it were alive, reacting to their presence. They moved in formation, weapons raised, silent as shadows. The plan was simple. Reach the core, plant the overload devices, and get out before the ship collapsed. Simple never meant easy. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the corridor. Ryan held up a fist, signaling a halt. Ahead, a squad of Kryzari warriors emerged, their chitinous armor gleaming under the artificial light. Unlike the mind-controlled humans they had fought before, these were elite, fully aware, and lethal. Their elongated heads tilted as they detected the intruders, their bodies shifting into attack stances. Jax didn't wait. He fired first, the blast of his modified rifle tearing through the closest enemy. The corridor exploded into chaos. The Kryzari moved with unnatural speed, their limbs elongating as they dodged and countered. One lunge at Ryan, its bladed appendage slicing through the air. He barely twisted out away before driving his combat knife deep into the alien's throat. It convulsed, an eerie, liquid screech escaping before collapsing. Ethan ducked behind cover, sending a drone scuttling across the floor. A second later, an electromagnetic pulse surged through the hallway, briefly disrupting the Kryzari's movement. Jax and Ryan seized the opportunity, unloading precise shots into their staggered enemies. The last alien dropped, its body twitching as energy bled from its wounds. "Keep moving," Ryan ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. They sprinted down the corridor, deeper into the ship, The further they went, the more the walls seemed to shift, as if aware of their presence. The Kryzari weren't just a species. They were a hive, a singular consciousness that adapted and evolved. Ethan glanced at his scanner. The core chamber is 3 levels down, but we've got a problem. Of course we do, Jax muttered. Ethan rotated the screen. They've locked down the main elevator. No way we're hacking through this fast enough. Ryan's mind raced. We find another way. Jax peered over the edge of a nearby maintenance shaft. The drop vanishing into darkness. Gravity tunnels. They use these to move heavy cargo. Ryan assessed the shaft. No cables, no ladders, just a sheer drop into the unknown. But there wasn't time to hesitate. He holstered his weapon and jumped. For a split second, gravity abandoned him. Then the tunnel's artificial field caught him, slowing his descent. He landed in a crouch, weapon raised. The others followed, one by one, their impacts muffled by the strange, shifting floor. They had landed in what looked like an armory, racks of Kryzari weapons lining the walls, glowing with an ominous blue light. Ryan barely had time to process it before an energy blast ripped through the air, narrowly missing his head. The Kryzari were waiting. A towering figure stepped forward, its armor more intricate than the rest, its posture exuding command. Vorik, the Kryzari warlord, the one who had orchestrated Earth's fall. Ryan barely had time to register the name before Vorik moved, faster than any of them could react. He struck, slamming Ryan against the wall. Stars exploded in his vision. He barely had time to roll before a blade carved through the space where his head had been. Jax opened fire, but Vorik moved like liquid, weaving between shots, his form blurring. He struck out with a pulse of energy, sending Jax crashing into a weapons rack. Ethan ducked behind cover, frantically typing into his wrist console. Ryan forced himself to his feet, knife in hand. He knew brute force wouldn't win this fight. Vorik was stronger, faster, and had centuries of warfare ingrained in his every move. So he changed the game. Ethan, now! Ethan triggered the drones, flooding the room with a blinding burst of light. Vorik staggered, just for a second, but a second was all Ryan needed. He surged forward, driving his knife up beneath the warlord's armor, twisting deep. Vorik let out a guttural sound, half pain, half laughter. He seized Ryan's wrist, his grip crushing. You think this changes anything? Vorik rasped. The Kryzari are endless. Ryan stared into the alien's dark, soulless eyes. Then he yanked the knife free and drove it in again. Vorik's body convulsed, his energy fading. He collapsed, his armor dulling, the glow of his eyes flickering out. Jax groaned, pushing himself up. Please tell me he's dead. Ryan exhaled. He's dead. Ethan didn't waste time celebrating. We still need to overload the core. They moved quickly, setting the charges. The ship groaned around them, as if sensing its impending doom. The moment the last device was armed, Ryan activated the timer. Time to go. They raced back toward the transport bay. The ship trembled, internal systems failing. As they neared the docked transport, the bulkheads began to collapse, fire and debris cascading around them. Ryan shoved Ethan inside first, then Jax. He turned for one last glance at the dying mothership before leaping in. The ramp sealed behind him, and Ethan launched him into the void. Through the viewport, they watched as the Kryzari warship convulsed, energy surging uncontrollably. Then, in a brilliant explosion, it imploded, vanishing in a blinding wave of light. Jax let out a ragged breath. Holy hell, we actually did it. Ethan stared at the fading debris. Then why does it feel like we didn't? Ryan didn't answer. Because deep down, he felt it too. They had won the battle. But the war wasn't over yet. The night sky burned with the dying embers of the Kryzari mothership, its once imposing form now a smoldering ruin collapsing into the upper atmosphere. Ryan Carter watched from the cockpit of their stolen transport, his grip on the control panel tightening as the shockwave rippled outward, scattering debris across the Earth's surface. It was over. The warlord was dead. The command ship was destroyed. They had done the impossible. And yet, a hollow ache settled in his chest. Victory should have felt like a relief, but all he could think about was what had been lost. Jax Thompson let out a long breath from the co-pilot's seat, running a hand over his face, smudging dirt and dry blood across his cheek. "We're still alive," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His voice lacked the usual sharpness, his energy drained. Ethan Wells sat hunched over a cracked tablet, its screen flickering as he cycled through intercepted transmissions. His fingers twitched over the keys, his usual ease with technology replaced by a quiet urgency. "I'm still picking up Kryzari signals. Fragmented, but they're out there." His voice was low, controlled, but Ryan caught the edge of exhaustion in it. Jax turned sharply. "What the hell do you mean?" "We just took out their command ship." Ethan met his glare with a grim expression. "It crippled them, but it didn't wipe them out. There are still active Kryzari ground forces, still smaller fleet ships in orbit. The hive is wounded, but not dead." Ryan exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers to his temple. "Then we finished the job." Ethan shook his head. "You don't get it. The Kryzari don't fight wars like we do. They adapt. Their forces were networked through Vorik. But now that he's gone, they'll reform under a new command. We bought time, but they're regrouping." Jax let out a dry, bitter laugh. "So what, we keep fighting? We just burn the sky, Ethan. What more do you want?" Ryan pushed himself away from the console and stood. The weight of command pressed against his shoulders, heavier than ever. "We started something bigger than just taking down one ship. If we stop now, we give them time to recover. They came to turn us into slaves. We either break them completely or they come back stronger." Silence stretched between them. The only sound was a distant crackle of intercepted transmissions, the ghostly remnants of the dying fleet whispering through the static. Jax leaned back, exhaling hard. "All right, so what's the move?" Ethan tapped the side of his screen. "There's one last transmission that's repeating on a low-frequency band. It's not Kryzari." He paused, then looked up. "It's human." Ryan's pulse quickened. "From where?" Ethan hesitated. "Europe. A resistance cell. They're still fighting." He glanced at Ryan, his gaze unreadable. "And they have intel. They know where the Kryzari reinforcements are coming from." Jack scoffed. "There's more of them?" Ryan nodded slowly, his mind already shifting into motion. "They didn't just send one fleet. This was an invasion force. If we still have fighters left out there, we rally them. We take the fight to the next front." Ethan hesitated, then flicked the message onto the main screen. A grainy image filled the cockpit. A woman, battle-worn, her face streaked with dirt and determination. Her voice crackled through the speakers. "This is Commander Helena Drake of the European Resistance. If you're receiving this, we need reinforcements immediately. Kryzari reinforcements have been spotted near the Arctic Rift. We believe it's a staging ground for an even larger force. If we don't stop them here, Earth will fall." The message cut to static. The weight of it settled over the cabin like a shroud. Jax was the first to break the silence. "Tell me we're not seriously considering flying into another war zone." Ryan turned to face him. "We didn't come this far just to let the bastards regroup." He glanced at Ethan. "Can you lock onto their coordinates?" Ethan's lips pressed together, but he nodded. "I can get us there." Jax let out a long, slow breath, then reached for his weapon. "Guess that means we're not done yet." Ryan turned back to the viewport, watching as the last fragments of the Kryzari mothership burned away, swallowed by the atmosphere. For the first time in days, he let himself feel something close to hope. The war wasn't over, but neither was humanity.